Welcome to Completely Booked,
the official podcast of the Jacksonville Public Library.
I'm Jenna.
And I'm Hurley.
Welcome back, everyone, to another fabulous Monday.
We have great news. StoryCorps is in town.
What?
Yes.
Hurley, tell the folks about StoryCorps.
I'm a huge StoryCorps nerd. I have loved this show since I was a kid. It is an NPR project. It's an oral history project. They go all over the country and they record interviews with two people. It's either two family members, two friends, two colleagues, two enemies could even enter the StoryCorps booth. And they talk about their lives themselves, their biggest fears, their biggest regrets, just like a really in-depth 40-minute long interview with each other. And they get really emotional. And I first learned about the show when I was a kid, like I said. Mm-hmm. My dad drove me to school every morning, and the StoryCorps segment would come on Friday mornings. And it wasn't the full 40-minute interview. It was always like a 2 to 3 minute segment. But they were like the most notorious tearjerkers of all time. And I really think to this day that the only time I ever saw my dad cry was when we were listening to StoryCorps. Yes. They're just like really beautiful stories that like appeal to any kind of person. And they're just like heartwarming and honest. And it's like the best kind of storytelling ever. So
it's really authentic too.
Totally.
Yeah. Because
exactly.
it's two people that like really know each other and they're just sitting there for a long time and they just, all the stuff just comes up.
Right.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah. When we talked to Jacqueline Van Meter, who's the site manager for StoryCorps, the mobile tour, she was telling us that when people sit down to do an interview, they really start crying in like the first minute.
Yeah, that was really interesting to me as well. It's like immediately.
Yeah.
You would think within like, all right, maybe 20 minutes in, they're really diving deep in the conversation. But yeah, within the first couple minutes, I wonder why. That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. And we actually got to interview her in the mobile van, which was really cool. It's this Airstream that they have parked in Memorial Park for the next couple of weeks. And they've been there since, I guess, right after Thanksgiving, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was so interesting being in there. And there were tissues on the table, you know, just in case we got emotional talking. But it was so cool talking to Jacqueline and learning all about her journey into radio. And we also got to learn about the things that kind of get her tearing up during the interviews too as a producer.
Right. So. Yeah, because one of them is always in the room with them, like making sure all the sound is right and stuff. And so they're sitting in on this very intimate conversation. And she said that they often get emotional as well.
Yep.
It's pretty cool. So here is Jacqueline Van Meter with StoryCorps.
Thank you so much for inviting us to come talk to you in the StoryCorps trailer.
This is amazing.
My pleasure.
I know.
I'm so glad you guys are here. Thank you.
Yeah, so Ken, you set the scene for us here first. Tell us where we're sitting.
So you, my friends, are in the StoryCorps Airstream trailer, also known as the mobile booth. It is I think a 2005, 2006 Airstream trailer, half of which is a little office out there, and you are currently in the interior recording booth, where participants come and join us to record conversations that are archived at the Library of Congress.
Gosh, this thing is like airtight.
Yep.
It's almost a little creepy when you step in. They close both doors, and it's like you're in like a little time capsule where nothing gets in and nothing goes out.
Right. It's kind of like a submarine.
Yeah.
Doesn't it feel that way?
It does,
That's the soundproofing, my friends.
It's amazing.
Got to keep it quiet.
Oh my gosh.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
We are so cozy in here on this beautiful day.
We've got the dim lighting, the wooden paneling to help us soundproof. The idea is really to create that environment so you can just focus on one another and really zero in on the conversation.
Definitely. So how did you first get started in radio?
So it's been a wayward journey. Back in undergrad, I was envisioning that I would be a lawyer of some kind, maybe an ACLU lawyer. Took a little time off after college, ended up routing into the sort of technology marketing startup world. Wasn't super fulfilled by that. Ended up moving to Latin America for a while to teach English, to just kind of reset the dials, take a break and explore, learn some Spanish. And while I was there, I thought kind of long and hard about, okay, when I go back to the States, what would I like to do? I love communications. I really loved the one-on-one interaction with students as I was teaching them, and just encouraging language and helping people to find their voice. And I also was just kind of a podcast junkie, like so many of us are. And so I thought it would be really interesting to try to do some kind of audio storytelling thing when I moved back to the States. Fast forward, I came back about 3.5 years later, was essentially on Dad's couch, plotting my next move. How do I become a producer? And I realized that StoryCorps, which is headquartered in Brooklyn, has a story booth, which is sort of a fixed brick and mortar recording and community space in the Atlanta History Center. And they were looking for someone who could part-time facilitate interviews for StoryCorps in English and in Spanish. And I called them up immediately and said, look no further. I'm your girl.
Right. That sounds like a shoe-in.
Yeah. It was an absolute twist of fate, because of course I'd heard of StoryCorps for years, and I'd actually even dreamed of working for StoryCorps. But
really?
Back when I was, like a marketing manager at a tech startup in San Francisco. But I thought, oh, I'm in this like private sector, and how could I ever move into StoryCorps, and what would that even look like? It was just sort of this like distant fantasy. And then lo and behold, I was just looking for gigs to kind of pay the bills when I got back to Atlanta. What am I going to do next? And there was StoryCorps, and they needed someone who could do exactly what I already knew how to do. And so I sort of entered into that world, made my way up, became a full-time facilitator at their headquarters in Brooklyn. It's referred to as the national team. There's a dedicated team of facilitators based in Brooklyn that essentially are dispatched all over the country for smaller projects. Sometimes we do initiatives like specific recordings with folks who are affiliated with the military, or folks from the LGBTQ community. We get grants to do different kinds of focused projects. And so the national team will kind of head out into the country and do recordings kind of focused around those types of topics. So I did that for a year, fell in love with being on the road. And then when the opportunity to be the manager of the mobile tour full-time came up, I said, that's where I need to be.
What do you like most about being on the road?
Oh, man. I am a wayward soul. I just love travel. I always find something that I really connect with everywhere I go. I think in particular, living in Argentina for 3.5 years really sharpened my lens around sort of like the nuance of culture. And I was so excited to reacquaint myself with American culture after being, an outsider and looking at it from another angle. And so what an incredible opportunity to be able to really explore the United States, particularly in a time like now,
right,
where things are a little tumultuous. Understatement. And to really understand like the particularities of regional culture in the United States. So that was just really fascinating to me personally. But I think what's so cool about this job in particular is not only am I traveling, but I'm spending my days listening to really intimate, intentional conversations from the people who live there, who can talk about how their community shapes who they are, consciously and unconsciously. So I can sort of understand the way that locals experience their community by day, and then in my free time go out and see it for myself.
Yeah,
it's an incredible way to get to know the country.
I was going to say it's a very unique way to travel and seriously truly immerse yourself in the culture and getting to know the people that actually live there and, have their lives and all the crazy things that goes along with living in a certain community. That's pretty unique.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing else like it.
No, not at all.
And this job, I bear witness daily to conversations that I have no business sitting in the middle of. These are people I don't know. I've never met before. I've greeted them, and they've trusted me, and they've trusted StoryCorps to provide them a space where they can have a really meaningful conversation, a very personal conversation, and I'm just in the room listening to it. So it gives me such an insight into the people, into what's important to them, and then I can kind of go out and explore what has meant so much to those folks on my own, and it's just amazing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who haven't heard the StoryCorps segment on NPR, can you describe StoryCorps just a little bit?
Sure. So if you were to just encounter a segment on the radio, it'll usually be maybe a 3 or 4 minute clip. It's sort of unnarrated, so you get a little context at the beginning, a little context at the end. But really what you're hearing is a conversation between two people who care about each other. And it could be any kind of pairing: friends, family members, neighbors, colleagues, sometimes people who have really kind of unusual connections to one another. But the idea is that they're having a conversation, intentional, talking about things that matter to them. It could be stories from their lives, or the conversation, that occasion itself could be the story. We've never talked about this before. There's something I've never said to you before. Or, are you proud of me? Is there anything you've never told me that you want to tell me now? You don't have to have an extraordinary story. Just taking advantage of that encounter to dialogue and really say what matters can produce some really extraordinary moments and emotion. And so if you're listening to a segment, you will hear that kind of conversation distilled down into a 3, 4, maybe a 5-minute moment that just captures something really, really unique and really intentional.
Right. So how do the interviewees decide what to talk about when they sit down in the StoryCorps booth?
It can, sometimes people come in and they have no idea. Other times they come in with long lists of questions. I think it's pretty common for people to end up kind of surprising themselves, but it really runs the gamut. Sometimes, as I said, people will want to document particular favorite stories in their family. Like, Dad, you always told me this story growing up about your grandfather. Can you tell it on the recording now so we have it documented? Sometimes people come in because they have an affiliation with an organization or a project that they're working on, and they want to talk about why that work means so much to them and what they've learned from each other working together. And so the preparation really varies. But we always encourage people when they're here to not think of it as a strict Q&A where it's question number 1, okay, question number 2, but really to let it become a conversation, to follow your curiosity. And if something kind of strikes you, to just kind of keep digging and find out more.
Right. So for the folks who come in and don't really know what they're going to ask each other, do you prompt them on things or do you give them ideas?
So if we have a sense that people have absolutely no notion of what they're going to talk about, usually we have on our website and also copies here in the booth of what we call the StoryCorps Great Questions list. It's just a list of all different kinds of questions that can be sort of a starting off point or a little inspiration. We have them kind of broken down by category, and then we just have sort of classic great questions for anybody. And those would be things like, what was the happiest time in your life? What was the most difficult time in your life? How do you want to be remembered? That classic question. Is there anything you've never told me that you want to tell me now or ask me now? Who has had the biggest influence on your life? Questions like that are a really great place for you to just kind of dig back in and think about what your life has meant to you and who've been the major players. So that tends to then surface so many other little details that helps people kind of move through the conversation and explore other topics.
What are some of the stories you've heard so far since you've been in Jacksonville?
So we've been here about a couple of weeks. So I've had maybe 3 or 4 days in the booth. Oddly, or not oddly, but I'm always surprised to discover themes surfacing right away. We have had, more so than at any other stop, at least I have had, 3 pairings that were single mothers talking to their teenage children, which is interesting because a couple of stops ago, we always host a listening event at the end of our engagement in a community where we bring folks together to listen to what we've recorded. And we have a Q&A with the audience, and someone asked, why don't we hear from teenagers more? We don't hear adolescents on the broadcast very often. And it got us thinking, it's true. We don't necessarily seems or feel surprised when we see teens come in, but we started to think maybe we don't see them as often as we should. And then I got to Jacksonville, and within the first 2 days, I had 3 17-year-olds talking with their single parent and really having like raw, honest conversations about. Y'all remember? It's not easy being a 17-year-old. Right. It's not easy being a single parent. So some really honest discussions about like, this is a struggle, but I love you. So that has really struck me. It's been so interesting to hear 3 different versions of that experience. Then we also, anytime we come to a community, there's a lot of planning and research that goes into who we're going to engage with in a stop. And we try to create partnerships with community organizations to help us recruit, to make sure that our participants are really representative of the diversity in any community that we visit. So we had a partnership where we actually went and recorded on site at Florida State College at Jacksonville with their ESL program. And so we had a number of recent immigrants and refugees who were in the process of learning English, talking about what their experience has been like kind of integrating to life in Jacksonville and being separated from family members that might be, thousands of miles away. So those conversations were really fascinating just to hear everybody's, and a lot of people really feel inclined to want to talk about their impressions of Jacksonville. It's like, I think more so in other places I've noticed that, what do we think of Florida? And what do we think of this community? What do we like about it? People really feel a sense of place here, and that's come up a lot.
Yeah, I think it's also, I've lived here my whole life, and I think a lot of that is having to constantly defend it too. And people suddenly grow very defensive when you ask them about where they live.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been told there are some pretty complex dynamics here, and it's a very big place. It's right. A lot of different people. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that's we've had folks come in. For another partner that I'm thinking of is an organization called Jasmine that works specifically with LGBTQ youth. But then we've also had pretty staunch conservatives come in and actually express interest in Another initiative, like the ones I mentioned, Military Voices or LGBTQ, we have a new initiative at StoryCorps called One Small Step, in which we are pairing together folks who identify from sort of opposite sides of the political divide to sit down and, rather than debate politics, to just talk a little bit about their personal experiences growing up and how their experiences have shaped their sort of political viewpoints. And so we had someone who came in who was a very staunch conservative, not necessarily the biggest segment of the StoryCorps listening audience, who was really resonating with the idea of not only recording, but potentially sitting down and participating in one of those conversations.
Oh,
too.
that's
Wow, I bet that would be
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
I can't wait to hear that. So my dad and I are both really big StoryCorps fans, and we always joke that whenever you hear the theme music come on NPR, you know you need to pull over and grab your tissues because you're going to start crying. So what is it about these segments that are such notorious tearjerkers? Like, why does everybody seem to have this response to StoryCorps?
Right? It is pretty universal. I mean, I think, as you can see, here we are in this Airstream, and the environment is really intentionally designed for people to focus on one another. And we as facilitators in the room set the intention. This is your time. Do with it what you will. And what often results is people have very intentional one-to-one conversations with no distractions, and they're really bringing, we always say, sort of bringing their best selves, and so there's less need to sort of like use humor to deflect or to be sarcastic or to be distracted by your cell phone. People are really honest and really candid, and they say things in a very heartfelt way that our day-to-day lives don't often make space for.
Right, that's such a rarity nowadays.
Absolutely. And it's amazing. We sort of know that consciously, but you really feel it when you sit down to have a StoryCorps conversation. And I said to you guys earlier, oftentimes if people who are participating in the recording choke up, they do it almost immediately because they suddenly realize the gravity of what they're doing, which is like making real time for one another.
Right.
And so when you distill that down to, its essence, to follow a story and put that on the radio, I think, there's so much great radio content out there, but what's unique about StoryCorps is, it's not performance, it's not marketing, it's not irony or entertainment. It's just really genuine, unguarded dialogue between people who care about each other. And it's something that we don't come into contact with very often. So I think it really hits home.
Yeah, definitely. And you have the tissues on the table, I see.
Obviously.
It's a necessity.
And you'll notice over at the facilitator table as well.
Really? Does that
Absolutely.
happen a lot?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. There's
I
a
bet
lot of emotion in a
emotions?
very small
Yeah.
space.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, witnessing it firsthand, I could see being even more emotional than just listening. Like seeing these people like look into each other's eyes and have this type of conversation, it would rip me up as well. I agree.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I mean, one thing we really try to remind ourselves of at StoryCorps, if you are on the facilitator staff, you are a person who has your own story. And like some days you're super sturdy and other days you're feeling a little bit more tender. And if somebody comes in here who reminds you of your parent, or somebody tells a story that's similar to an emotional experience you had in your life, things will resonate. So heck, I remember being in Denali National Park. This was in my previous position when I was doing a special project on the national team, and we flew up to Alaska. And that's an example I often think of where I was crying more than the participants were, because they just had these incredible stories about working out in the wilderness in the 70s when there were no cell phones, and just how impactful that was. And sob. I just found it incredibly moving and beautiful. So, we're all people in the room. It's emotional in here.
Yeah, that's good to hear. You don't have to lock it up and throw away the key.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can let it kind of wash over you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, we are professionals, and our goal is not to distract. Like, this is always for the participants, and so we'll be discreet. But, we feel things over there, too. That's for sure.
Of course. So I know the interviews are edited down from their original states to appear on the radio sometimes. What goes into that editing process?
Oof, what a question. And it's one we get a lot. The editing process is a very extensive process. There's sort of two ways that a StoryCorps interview can end up on the radio. Either locally, the mobile tour, of course, partners with a public radio station in each stop where we go. So, we're working here with WJCT. And so they will collaborate with us and will sort of recommend stories that might fit themes that the local station is particularly interested in. And then, of course, we've got 40 minutes of content that we've got to get down to 3, maybe 4 minutes. So there's often just looking for a narrative arc, sort of a beginning, a middle, and end, some reflection. And that's a great format sometimes, but other times it's just, look, this conversation was full of humor and full of love. It might not tell one particular story, but it captures a dynamic. It captures a relationship. People have things to say to one another or about one another. An example I'm thinking of, we have a really classic national broadcast, one that StoryCorps producers edited in-house that went out all across the country. That was a conversation between a father and two sons. I think they were maybe 8 and 10 at the time. And they just launched all of these interview questions at Dad. Why don't we have a roller coaster? Can we get a van? Like, what did you think when I was born? Why can't I be more like you? And they're just firing off these questions, and there's no story there.
Yeah.
But the moment and just the energy and the love and the humor in the room was something that everybody across the country needed to hear.
Right. So when you're in the room recording these, do you know pretty instantly, like, oh, yes, this part belongs on the radio?
Yeah, we can hear magic. And listen, there's so much that I fall in love with every participant. There's always some nugget of wisdom. I mean, people come here and they make their mark on history. So they bring their intention and they have things to say more often than not. And a lot of things move us. But, I think one of the things that kind of guides StoryCorps' decisions around what goes on the air. We've been doing this now for over 15 years. And so what we're looking for, we're always kind of keeping an ear out for what story hasn't been told yet. Who could we be better representing? How can we tell something surprising or unexpected? And so, everybody is very familiar with what we've already put out on the air. And so we're looking for something new and different. So that's one thing that we kind of keep an eye out for. Interesting pairings or just interesting perspectives, untold histories. But then also there is just you can just feel the electricity. If there is a moment of tenderness or humor or love and I'm like, that needs to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. Somebody else needs to hear that beyond me.
Right.
And so I'll recommend that and say, please find a place for this on the air. Definitely.
So a big part of the StoryCorps mission is archiving the stories in the Library of Congress. What is the importance of archiving audio storytelling?
Absolutely. Of course, the broadcast is the beloved public-facing piece that we all know, and it's certainly how we get the word out, but genuinely the bread and butter of StoryCorps and the legacy that will live on well beyond the broadcasts that go out is this archive that we've created. And we think of this as an opportunity to really democratize oral history, and not just for historians to go out and make select interviews, but really to put it in the hands of everyday Americans. Everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has a lens on their own life experience. You don't need to be an expert to know what you've lived, right? And so giving people the opportunity to get their voice on the record, it's a new approach to storytelling and history telling. But then, there are certain segments of the population, communities, demographics where they haven't had the opportunity to get their story told on the record. Their stories are told for them, not by them. And so that's really a major priority for StoryCorps and why we do so much research around how we can partner with outreach organizations to make sure that we're getting those stories that might not make it to mainstream media, or that are not typically told because folks might not have as much access or representation in everyday media. So our hope is that we give those folks an opportunity to tell their story on their own terms, in their own words, and know that that will be documented as part of history for anyone who wants to hear it for generations to come.
So for anyone who wants to hear it, how do they hear it?
Aha. So historically, we archive at the Library of Congress, which in practical terms means someone could go to the Folklife Center in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., approach an archivist and say, I'm interested in X story, and I know, could I search the StoryCorps archive? And it might be, Hurley is my great-great-grandmother, and I know that she recorded with StoryCorps. I'd love to hear that story. Or it could be, I'm interested in stories of librarians that worked in northern Florida in the 21st century, right? Mm-hmm. So any kind of search, whether it's really targeted or a little bit more broad. And then an archivist will make that search, give you the results, and you can listen to the recording on site. Now, you can't go away with it, but you can listen and do your research there in the Library of Congress. However, we recognize that this is an extraordinary resource to be able to provide to people. And so we at StoryCorps have been painstakingly in the process of making a digital version of this collection, which, by the way, is to the tune of 77,000 recordings.
Oh
my
so
gosh.
many.
And counting.
And counting.
Right.
Yeah, every day more, right? So we're in the process of making all that digitally available on our website. TBD on the big unveiling for that. It's a work in progress. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of work that goes into calling up people who recorded in 2007. And you remember when you recorded and you archived? How would you feel about having that on our website?
Oh,
right.
So you need permission.
There's some
from
implications there.
77,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now that we know that we're building it, when we record folks, we tell them, if you're interested in archiving it, you have a couple of different options. And one would be to give us permission to include it in our forthcoming digital archive so that anyone could enjoy listening to it on the website. You have a link. You can share it with your family and friends and know that it's on our site. Is that of interest to you? And so people can opt in now.
Okay.
So
Wow,
stay
what a
tuned.
resource that's going to be.
Right. Can you imagine?
So you might lose some of the older ones, don't you think?
At least online. Those will, of course,
Right.
always be preserved in the Library
Right.
of Congress. Right, exactly. But we, for us, informed consent is so important. And,
Right.
and these are people's stories and their lives and their voices. And so, a lot can change over time. We want to make sure that everyone who's sort of represented digitally and publicly accessible on the archive feels comfortable about the fact that their story is out there.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So it's an undertaking.
Wow. And how do you
Yeah.
choose which cities you take the mobile tour to?
So that is a very sort of particular formula of planning. First and foremost, it always begins with having a really solid public radio partner in the community. So, and then of course we look at where we've been in recent years and where we haven't been and need to get more representation, right? And so we'll look at those regions and reach out to public radio stations and see whether or not they'd be willing to collaborate with us. The public radio stations do a lot for us. Of course, they get the word out. They sort of organize where the booth is going to be parked. So WJCT did a great job of collaborating with Memorial Park Association to get this beautiful spot here right by the water.
And how did they choose that? Sorry, quick interlude.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
dying to know how it ended up in Memorial Park.
Yeah, honestly, it's a little bit of a behind-the-scenes deal that I don't have a ton of visibility
Okay.
into. I don't
Gotcha.
personally do that organizing, but I think we're always looking for places that are like publicly accessible, right? That
Right.
people are familiar with. That can people get here via public transportation, or is there highway access so that people can find it easily? Is it safe? Is it well lit? Is there electricity for us to plug in? Is there a bathroom nearby? It really varies. We can be in cultural institutions, museums, libraries, and then this is probably one of our most picturesque locations to date. It's really beautiful here.
It's really right by the river. And as we were
Yeah.
walking in, the river is just dazzling in the sunlight, though I'm sure in the rain it's can get a little dreary. But
Yeah, well, more than anything, we don't mind it. You can hear if the rain really starts pouring. You can actually hear it tapping on the Airstream, right? But no, I mean there's no better office than working in this Airstream. It's just incredible where it can go and what it can do. And to your question, Jenna, just to complete that thought, in addition to sort of thinking about like where do we need to be more representative of stories, where have we not been in a while, where can we find a great partner, there's also sort of the climate constraints as well. So we end up being far north in the winter, and here we are, it's December in Florida. That's not by accident. We were in North Dakota and Wyoming over the summer, and we'll be back up north like in Michigan towards the summer this coming year.
Smart. That makes sense.
Well, we've got air conditioning in here, but it's a little limited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
now, Jacqueline, you are clearly so passionate about what you do, so I know this is going to be a hard question to answer.
Uh-oh.
But what is your favorite part about working for StoryCorps?
There's just no other job like it. As I said before, I'm able to witness and participate in encounters that, only in this context would I be able to witness these kinds of things, and people trust me to just be in the room and bear witness to the fact that they're sharing really heartfelt, emotional, thoughtful words of wisdom and love and affection and reflection. And so I have just come into contact with so many extraordinary people who have just an infinite number of ways of looking at the world and looking at their loved ones. So it's just it's an incredible privilege to experience that trust among so many people in so many different places. So I think that I know it'll take me some time because we work and we're always moving. I'm looking forward to the moments after I've completed this job to really look back and reflect on everything that I've absorbed. I think we always talk about how hard it is to sort of synthesize everything in the moment, but it's just been an amazing opportunity to really discover what makes people's heart beat all across this country.
That's beautiful. It really is.
Get the tissues. Get Hurley a tissue.
That's what happens in here, ladies.
You can feel the vibe, yeah, the tissue vibe. So one more question, and we ask all of our interviewees this question. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, gosh. So I'm an extrovert. You may have noticed.
I haven't, actually.
Breaking news. When I was really young, I thought it would be amazing to be an actress. And then my sort of practical brain started saying, well, in what other ways could you sort of get up in front of people and articulate things, but have it be more practical and maybe a little bit more, I don't want to say more impactful, because of course the arts are the arts. But I started to think that it might be interesting to be like a litigator. And as I mentioned to you guys earlier, I was thinking maybe I would go to law school, become an ACLU lawyer, defend free speech. And that's where my head was at for kind of a long time. And then things just kind of took a turn. I don't know. I realized that analytical side, I have it, but I think my strongest intelligence is emotional intelligence. And my natural inclination is just to want to connect with people in a really authentic way. And if I can help other people connect with each other in that way, even better. And so the fact that I have now wound up in this job where I get to do that and record it and everybody's on the same page, that this is a moment to really take advantage of and to really be a part of, it's right where I need to be.
And you still get to defend free speech
where
you are. Yeah.
God bless the media, right? Yes. Get the word out there. Public media forever.
Love our public media and our public libraries.
Indeed.
Shameless plug.
Amen. Get it in there, girl. Here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us in, Jacqueline.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
If you wanted to participate in StoryCorps but couldn't get a slot, because I know they filled up like really fast because you have to reserve a time slot, but we are doing something very similar here at the main library. It is called Family Ties, Weaving Narratives of Northeast Florida. You can record your own story and we'll actually archive it in our Florida collection and possibly in the Library of Congress.
Yes, indeed. You can come by our Jack's Makerspace before the end of the year and record your own personal story, because I know every family has that one story that they always tell. I mean, we all just had Thanksgiving. You probably heard the same story that you hear every year. That's like an amazing story and needs to be archived. So please come by the main library, tell us your story. You can go online and reserve a time to do that too. And we'll link that to our page at jackspubliclibrary.org/podcast.
Indeed. Yeah, we have all the recording equipment set up down there. Come in, bring your friends, family, record something, and you can actually bring a USB and take it home with you right then.
Yep.
Pretty cool.
Makes a great gift.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Oral history.
They're also having an event with StoryCorps at WJC2 Studios this Thursday for any of the StoryCorps nerds in the crowd like myself. It's a StoryCorps listening party, and they're going to be playing some of the segments that they recorded here in Jacksonville over the past couple of weeks. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I personally will be there, so you can also meet
big
me.
Bonus. Get to meet Hurley.
I know it's a really big deal. So no autographs, please.
Oh, gosh.
But that starts at 6:30, and it's at WJCT Studios, which is right across the street from Everbank Field.
And it is
I'm
free.
so sorry. It's TIAA Bank Field.
Oh, my God.
Pardon me. Alltel Stadium. Alltel Stadium. That's what we're going with.
Ultimate throwback.
Right across from Alltel.
Gosh. Yeah. Well, anyways, that event is free, but you need to RSVP on their Facebook event on Eventbrite. I think they have an Eventbrite if you want to look it up on Eventbrite.
Yes.
But anyways, RSVP.
Make sure you like StoryCorps on all of their social media platforms. They are at StoryCorps, and that's spelled CORPS.
Indeed.
Not CORE. They're like a corporation of stories.
Yes. StoryCorps.
Corpse.
As I like to refer to it.
But not like a dead story corpse.
Yeah.
You know? You see what I'm saying? CORPSE?
Yes. Just
wordplay.
Just a CORPS. No E.
That's it.
Make sure you like us as well at Jack's Library on all the interweb social networking sites.
Subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'd love it if you rated us and left us a review.
Fabulous. We would. And we also have a quick little survey if you want to tell us what we're doing well, what you'd like to hear. We would love to hear your suggestions. So that is on our podcast page, jackspubliclibrary.org/podcast. And in the right-hand side, it says, take our survey.
Exclamation point.
That's how you know this is where you take our survey.
Take it. This podcast was produced by Brian Thomas, a.k.a. BT, a.k.a. Producer Brian. Goodbye!